Masmodeus story. Scandinavia, lands ruled by several kingdoms during the Viking Age. A land of widespread green fields of grass, humble farmlands bordering with lands of rocky mountains, ice and snow. For centuries, this land was home to the most fearsome warriors. Their urge for expansion and fortune was unwavering, and their weapons always sharpened to strike any foe that would stand in their way. Though, whilst all were Viking in essence, many wars did wage among their clans. If battle or land could not be achieved overseas, then the strongest laid claim on the weaker, causing the kingdom to be ever-changing. A proud people living under the banners of their rulers, fighting for land, glory, and a seat in the eternal longhouse of heroes in Valhalla. But to achieve such prestige, one must achieve greatness in life, no matter how humble one's beginnings are. And so begins the story of Brynjar, born to Harald, renowned scout of the local raiders, and Astrid, mother and homemaker of the family. They owned a small plot of land just outside the settlement, and provided for both the household and the community alike. Unlike other Viking families around them, Harald and Astrid allowed their young son to take life as it came. They wanted Brynjar to explore the world around him, play with other children, and fantasize about becoming a great warrior when he would grow older. Even though he was granted his freedom, the boy willingly aided his mother around the house and on the fertile farmlands. Life was simple, without many hardships. Though, as Brynjar aged, he would often find himself drawn to the thrill of adventure. His father Harald came back from raids, mostly victorious, bringing stories of valor, glory, and honor. Those stories would further influence him to grab a wooden sword and run far into the fields of the farm, swinging at the grain or at a neglected piece of fence. During those outings, Brynjar would fathom himself as a brave yet just warrior, claiming the land for his family, seeking riches beyond their own. Was that not what was expected of the son of a powerful, renowned Viking? Fortunately, he did not have to fantasize all by himself, as most of the town's children shared similar dreams. Eventually, as Brynjar was gaining in years, his parents brought two siblings into the world, a brother named Birger and a sister named Astrid. Both were loved by the young Viking equally, as blood ran thicker than water. He would watch them whenever their father would be out on a scouting mission, and their mother worked the farm. It gave Brynjar the responsibility that he desired, to prove that he was worthy of his parents' trust and his ability to protect the weaker. Fortunately, Brynjar's efforts did not go unnoticed. Those that showed visible prowess and skill could not remain overlooked for long. Being the son of a respected Viking scout was definitely an advantage, as one day Harald came home accompanied by members of the training assembly. It did not take them long to witness the young Viking's potential as Brynjar demonstrated his affinity to the blade. They offered the family to take their son under their wing, to train him to be a formidable warrior that could continue the legacy his father had built. Was that not the dream of every young boy? Education, in every single form, was something not all families within the community could provide for their kin, and only those privileged enough would amount to greatness. But being chosen also came with a huge load of responsibilities. Brynjar could not fail. If he did, he would bring shame to his family's name. After a heartfelt goodbye to his parents and siblings, he set off with the warriors to train far away from the village, in the frozen mountains up north. The journey was long and not without its dangers, but his escorts were there to protect him. No harm befell him during their travels, and soon they arrived at a large training camp in the valley between two vast mountains. The camp was remote, far away from any civilization, but it was not devoid of life, as many children around his age roamed around the settlement, swinging swords, shooting bows, and learning a variety of crafts. Upon Brynjar's arrival, he was introduced to a man called Skald, a veteran who dedicated the last few decades of his life to instructing new recruits. The man was strict, did not take kindly to pupils showing weakness, and would often push the youngsters to their limit. It was like a wake-up call for the young warrior. Where his childhood had been nothing but positive, real life was not easy, and comfort was not secured for everyone. While most of the teachers expected Brynjar to crumble once he was exposed to constant training, he actually surprised them all with his sheer motivation. Over the years that followed, Brynjar never stopped learning. His skill with the blade was undeniable, which eventually started to branch out to other facets of the training. He was equally skilled with spears and blades, and would often come out victor during sparring matches. Slowly, his peers became no match to him no longer. The instructors had to spar with him instead. Even they could not keep up with the young warrior's exponential growth. Many skilled fighters would have allowed their ego to take the better of them, but Brynjar remained as humble as he had always been. All of his efforts were to make his family proud, to protect them from whatever could come to harm them in the future. Though, while combat was deemed as a priority within the training camp, the pupils would be granted lessons in other skills. Brynjar had never been to the coast before. Therefore, he was drawn to the open waters. The camp allowed him to join the shipbuilding classes. Hard labor was not necessarily foreign to him, but came with its challenges. The craft itself was easily enough to master, but building a full longship took a lot of patience and hard work. But hard work paid off. Brynjar was allowed to sail the ship the moment it was seaworthy, and learned how to navigate with the help of the stars in the sky and studying the coastal landmarks around the country. In between shipbuilding and combat training, Brynjar learned how to read and write the runic script and helped out in the forge whenever it was requested of him. Brynjar remained with the training camp until his 18th birthday was right around the corner. A call from home was delivered to him by one of his father's scouts. He was to return home as soon as possible, as he would soon be a fully grown adult man. A new part of his life was about to happen, and his parents had clear ideas of what they wanted it to look like for their eldest son. Upon the earliest of his convenience, Brynjar left the training camp for good, traveling back home without any aid, a type of rite of passage for young warriors like him. Fortunately enough, he had survived for nearly 18 years. A few days on foot by himself would not be too big of a deal. He ventured through blizzards, extreme temperatures, and enemy terrain, but he managed to find his way back home safely. Upon returning home, Brynjar received a warm welcome from his family. His siblings were all grown up now, the crops teeming with a fruitful harvest as summer was in full swing. And what was waiting for him at the farm with his relatives was a young woman. Thurid, the daughter of one of Jarl Thorvald's men, was beautiful and regal. Brynjar's parents and hers had been friends for decades. It was only to be expected for their eldest children to unite their families through marriage. The young warrior did not protest, knowing that this would benefit everyone, and married Thurid quickly after his return to the village. It was what was expected of him, and of course, Brynjar was loyal to his kin, even if that meant making choices that would be more advantageous to other people, but not himself. Life had changed drastically for Brynjar ever since his return to the farm. Where he had not been forced into any responsibilities, he was suddenly expected to lead them by example, following in his father's footsteps as the head of the household. With Thurid now part of their family and the land in a state of peace, life was calm, humble. He became the head of the household, as his father remained within his function as a scout. But as winter came a few years later, Harald and his scouts returned from a long trek around the clan's territory. They brought news of sightings of enemy scouts skulking within the land's bounds. As war had not happened for years, Jarl Thorvald ordered for a small scouting party to be assembled to seek out these enemy scouts, with or without bloodshed. As his father needed to recover from the long journey, they pursued someone to take his place instead. Due to his family's loyalty to the Jarl and the region, Brynjar was presented as the leader of the party. It meant leaving his home behind, his family and his wife. But as loyalty was his utmost priority, there was no reason for him to say no to the order. All the years of training would finally pay off. Packed with weapons and rations, Brynjar set out at first light to the border to the south, followed by his father's men. The journey would last about 4 days, and in essence would be a fairly straightforward mission. The men knew where to go, and with their trust, they covered a lot of ground quickly. For long, they stayed on track, but as the border slowly came into view, all they saw was fire, blood, and death on the horizon. The group came upon a dying soldier, barely hanging by a thread. Brynjar managed to quickly ask what happened, to which the soldier could barely bring out the words, "Civil war had commenced," and they would keep moving further north to claim ground. As the soldier exhaled his last breath, the scouts knew this was something to take seriously. News had to be delivered back to the settlement. So, Brynjar took it upon himself to venture on and seek out what had transpired and how fast they were moving, while the scouts would head back. Even though the others had doubts about sending the young Viking forward on his own, they could not go against their leader's wish. In the dark, the scouts turned around and headed on home, while Brynjar pushed further south. Finding information in a war zone was always tricky, yet Brynjar was determined to figure out what the source of the bloodshed had been. By himself, he was able to move about rather quickly and unseen, though he soon realized that the large armies of enemy Vikings could pose a threat the moment they would figure out he did not belong to their ranks. The continuous snowfall did provide him enough cover as it snowed over his tracks. Whenever the armies pushed forward against the smaller settlements, stripping them clean of all their wealth, harvest and women, Brynjar knew there was a reason behind all of this. He had to move deep within enemy territory, find that route and return home quickly before the southern settlements would overtake his home. Eventually, he finally discovered the reason. The south had been plagued by a devastating famine due to a bad harvest the last summer and fall seasons. Their food supplies ran out faster than they had anticipated, and the local jarl had established a high tax on its citizens. Dissatisfaction brewed beneath the surface, until the people got enough of their chief's unreasonable war tax. Riots started to break out, led by the loudest voices within their groups, and war soon followed. Brynjar was conflicted. There were always two sides to the same coin. While unhappiness can break community, loyalty to the jarl should never dwindle, or so he was taught. Desperation could make people do the craziest things, and therefore it seemed inevitable that it could result in violence and rage. There were never victors in war, only loss, and this war needed to end before it would escalate further north. But would there be an end if the region was already destroying itself from the inside? What havoc could they wreak when they would venture any further than they already had? Brynjar had seen enough. The urge to return home with all the evidence he had found was almost agonizing. As long as he could make it back home faster than the war would spread, everything would be alright. Their jarl's warriors were the bravest, most resilient of them all. There was just no way they could lose to the starving, exhausting forces that were heading in their direction. Brynjar turned back home. He assumed that with the few supplies he still had left, he had to make it back home in one piece. But as the days and nights blended into one, and the road home started feeling longer than before, things looked progressively bleaker. His drive to push himself to his limits to get home slowly started to spiral. Brynjar could feel the winds become stronger as the snow became more intense. He was about a day's worth away from his community, but as a blizzard crossed his path, he knew he had to seek shelter to survive. If he would not make it through, his people would be doomed. But the dense forest that stretched before him, obscured by the snow, made his heart sink even further. Desperation kicked in soon after he stumbled through the trees, begging under his breath, until finally the brave warrior broke down. Malnourished, suffering from the icy cold, Brynjar sunk to his knees, fists banging up against the tree trunk, as he knew he would not survive the night without proper coverage from the cold. He was at his wit's end, throwing up his hands to the sky in the hopes someone, anyone, would hear him. He pleaded with the gods, begging them not to forsake him while his people still needed him. Brynjar could not imagine himself ending this way. dying from the cold, from the lack of food and drink. That was not a warrior's death. It would make all his hard work and loyalty to the Jarl and the gods futile. His words drifted forth from the powerful winds, disappearing into nothingness. Silence overtook his surroundings, and slowly, Brynjar felt himself slump forward, his weary body unable to keep himself upright no longer. This was the end, was it not? Valhalla no longer beckoned for him, as he was forgotten within this no-man's land. Just as Brynjar felt himself slip away, the sky above him started to rumble, turning a deep purple. It drew his eyes to the heavens, taking in the sudden, unnatural hue of the sky. Was this Ragnarok? Had it finally commenced? A sudden warmth caught him off guard, right before a bolt of lightning struck a tree not far from where he sat. Brynjar had to look away, protecting his eyes from the bright impact with his shield. For a minute, he remained stationary, but as the silence returned, he finally dared to investigate. But what he saw truly shocked him to the core. A shadow emerged from the smoke, slowly taking the shape of a creature. It looked human, but then he saw dark horns sprouting from his forehead. It stood idly for a while, as Brynjar tried to regain his footing. Slowly, he rose his shield in defense, shouting at the figure whether they were friend or foe. But, without an answer given, the creature suddenly rushed forward at inhuman speed. With his shield as his only form of cover, the brave Viking braced himself. If he would not stand his ground now, he would never reach Valhalla. This battle was a matter of survival of the fittest. The creature lashed out at Brynjar with razor-sharp claws, while he warded them off with his shield and tried slashing back at her with his sword. They clashed ever so often and inflicted numerous wounds upon one another. And still they went on. There was no knowing how long they were going on. As they fought, Brynjar could finally take in his opponent. A woman, devil horns curling out of her brow, her skin as purple as the sky above them. Her nails were like needles, clawing through his skin like paper. For as long as he could, the Viking pushed himself to survive. But the extreme fatigue was catching up, sooner than he had anticipated. With his final strength, stamina draining from his arms, Brynjar forced the devil woman away with a wide slash. Unfortunately, it missed her by an inch as he tried to catch his breath. All he could read on her face was a devious smirk, her eyes glistening with satisfaction. There was no time to ponder on the reasons why this woman fell from the sky as if Thor's hammer struck her down. She looked relaxed, almost confident. This was the moment Brynjar could strike. Unprovoked, he lunged at her in an attempt to swing his sword. But she was too cunning. With immense force, she broke through his shield, shattering it into hundreds of pieces before grabbing him by the throat. Blood poured from the puncture wounds of her nails piercing his skin, the snow turning bright red. Without any remorse, she let go of him, Brynjar's body slumping down on the ground by her feet. And just as he lost consciousness, 3 words echoed through his mind. See you soon. darkness persisted. Time passed by as it always had. The moment Brynjar opened his eyes again, gasping awake, he found himself back at the farm, surrounded by his family. Once he had fully regained consciousness, his kin told him that a few local warriors got ordered to retrieve him, finding him unconscious in the snow. How he had survived the blizzard was nothing short of a miracle. But to Brynjar, he knew what had happened. How had he survived the demon woman's attack? As a few days passed to regain his strength, Jarl Torvald visited the farm in the hopes to speak to Brynjar in person. He wanted to know what exactly had happened. The Viking tried to reiterate all the information he had acquired on his mission about the war, the shortages, and the rebellion, and eventually about the woman from the forest. All he could provide of the encounter was a big purple wound on his chest. Jarl Torvald brought the news that Jarl Freyr from the southern region had fallen, and that it had divided the neighboring regions and their jarls to provide its people with a more prosperous future. But the confession of thwarting the gods and possibly summoning a demon to their lands was foolish. Brynjar was as good as cursed for the rest of his life. Until he could care for himself again, he was told to rest and heal. However, when the following day came, the Viking felt he had healed sufficiently. But as he showed his face around the village again, he was met with intrigue and suspicion. It seemed news had spread like wildfire. The villagers kept their distance, and so did his family, as they were all quite shaken by previous actions. Life was no longer what it was. He felt trapped, haunted, and without purpose. Whispers persisted, and the nickname Bjölva was uttered wherever he went. Cursed. As the days passed by, the pain started to come back to the wound. The skin around it started to turn the same trademark purple, and voices seemed to echo deep within the psyche. The curse started to spread far quicker, and within a few days, the voices in his dreams started to take shape into actual faces. Strange cities and regions beyond the places he knew. A word kept coming back within the whispers. Void. Was this the place the voices were showing him? Was this where he truly belonged? Brynjar concluded that with his current predicament, he could not stay and live the life he had. He was ever changed by the encounter of the demon, and now his body was changing. To protect his family, he packed all his belongings and supplies that could aid him on his journey, and before an actual exile could happen, he left his old life behind. Brynjar was no more. Bölva would find his path away from it all. Without knowing where to go, Bölva could feel himself being drawn in a certain direction. Like a tether, he was pulled forward and traveled up towards the northern mountains. He knew the journey would be long, but the road ahead was fortunate enough to make his trek no longer than 9 days. When he finally reached the mountains, he could sense his body was changing. His body was taller and broader than before, and where his skin had turned purple, it had significantly become harder to detach. Tougher in a way. For days, Bölva scaled the walls of the mountain. Like a sixth sense, he suddenly had a sense of direction, pulling him closer to whatever destination was before him. The climb seemed endless, though he was no longer bothered by the constant cold surrounding him. Slowly, he reached the mountain's largest peaks. It did not take long for him to find certain tracks leading further, and eventually into a cave. It was well hidden, away from the regular path. Bölva had to enter the cavern. His instinct was forcing him to venture into the darkness until his eyes started to get used to the absence of light. There was no way his eyes could see through the pure darkness. And yet, he had no trouble at all. He walked into a dead end, one after another, until the familiar cacophony of voices echoed through the system, like a siren's lure. Bölva followed suit until he approached another dead end. Though, as he walked closer, the wall suddenly opened before him, and beyond that was what he was looking for. The endless city within the void, away from the realm of earth and its people. His heart was filled with purpose, and, without ever looking back, he entered the void, his home lost behind him. Bölva called the void his new home, and completed his transformation into a fearless warrior demon. To leave his cursed self behind, fully accepting his current reality, he adopted the name Masmodeus, a name only befit to one of his caliber. Millennia have passed since he entered, and as time moves tremendously slow within this realm, the Viking age long since passed, and the modern era blossoms in the Earth realm. Masmodeus has not been successful in finding the demoness that turned him, but has slowly come to realize that his transformation into a fiend was a strange gift that led him all the way here. One day he knows he will find her and set things straight for himself, but has yet to find them here. By the technology he has acquired through links with the modern world, Masmodeus now uses the internet, streaming to find his arch nemesis, hoping that through the help of his loyal followers, he can finally have his revenge.